I hope my noble friend would feel able to support them.
My Lords, I have an amendment in this group that is that clause 139 should stand part of the bill. I want to remove the idea of Ofcom having any kind of an advisory committee on misinformation and disinformation as it's been understood, at least. I would like to say that I actually welcome the fact that the government has, in general, steered clear of putting disinformation and misinformation into the bill, because I think that the whole narrative around mis and disinformation has become politicised and even weaponised, often to delegitimise opinions that do not fit into a narrow set of official opinions, or just simply to shout abuse at opponents. And we all want the truth, but if only the truth was as simple as hiring fact-checkers or setting up a committee. I'm actually particularly opposed to Amendment 52 in the name of Baroness Marin and Lord Bethel, that they've both spoken very eloquently to their concerns, focusing on harmful health, mis and disinformation. But actually I'm opposed to it because it precisely illustrates my point about the danger of these terms being used as propaganda. There was an interesting and I think important investigative report brought out in January this year by Big Brother Watch, entitled Inside Whitehall's Ministry of Truth: How Secretive Anti-Information Teams Conducted Mass Political Monitoring. Rather dramatic headline. But we do now know that the DCMS had a counter-disinformation unit that had a special relationship with social media companies that it used to recommend that content was removed, that actually, interestingly, due to other groups that we've discussed, used third-party contractors to trawl through Twitter looking for perceived terms of service violations as a reason for those to be removed. This information warfare, you might say, tactic was used to target politicians and high-profile journalists who raised doubts or asked awkward questions about the official pandemic response. Dissenting views were reported to Number 10 and then often denounced as misinformation, with ministers pushing social media platforms to remove posts and promote government-sponsored lines. A similar fake news unit, it's been revealed, was in the Cabinet Office that got Whitehall departments to attack newspapers for publishing articles that analysed COVID-19 modelling, not because it was accurate. It wasn't. That modelling wasn't accurate in many instances, but because it feared any scepticism would affect compliance with the rules. David Davis MP appeared in an internal report on vaccine hesitancy, and his crime was arguing against vaccine passports as discriminatory, which was a valid civil liberties opposition, but posed as health misinformation. And a similar approach was taken to vaccine mandates that led to tens of thousands of frontline care workers getting sacked, even though by the time this happened, the facts were known that the vaccine was absolutely invaluable in protecting individual health. But it did not stop transmission, and therefore there was no need for those vaccine mandates to be implemented. And I think that the fact that that wasn't discussed is a real example of misinformation, but we didn't, in fact, have that in the public sphere. Professor Carl Hennigan's Spectator article questioning whether the rule of 6 was an arbitrary number was also flagged across Whitehall as misinformation. But we now know that the rule of 6 was arbitrary. And anyone who has read the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages, which were leaked to the Telegraph and which many of us read with interest, will know that many of those who pointed at that actually many of what the things that were posed as the science and factual was in fact more driven by politics rather than anything else. COVID policies were not all based on fact, and yet they accused others of misinformation. Beyond health, the Twitter files leaked by Elon Musk when he became its new owner show the dangers of using the terms mis and disinformation to pressure big tech platforms into tools of political censorship. In the run-up to the 2020 election, Joe Biden's presidential campaign team routinely flagged tweets and accounts it wanted to be censored, and we now have all seen the screen grab of email exchanges between executives as evidence of that. So Twitter suppressed the New York Post's infamous Hunter Biden laptop expose on the spurious grounds that it was planted Russian misinformation. The Post was even locked out of its own account. It took 18 months for the Washington Post and the New York Times to get hold of and investigate Hunter Biden's emails, and both determined that the New York Post's original report was indeed legitimate and factually accurate, but it was suppressed as misinformation when it might have made some political difference in an election. We might say that all is fair in love and war in elections, but just to make us think about what we mean by misinformation and why it's not so simple. Was the Labour Party attack ad that claimed that Rishi Sunak didn't believe that paedophiles should go to jail, was that fair comment or disinformation? And who decides? I note that the Tobias Elwood MP has called for a cross-party inquiry on the issue, calling on social media platforms to do more to combat, quote, malicious political campaigns. I'm not saying that I have a view on it one way or another, but my question is, who gets to label information as, in that instance, malicious or fake or misinformation? Who gets the final say? Is it a black and white issue? How can we avoid it becoming partisan? Yesterday, at the illegal migration bill, second reading, I listened very carefully to the very many contributions, and huge numbers of noble lords continually claimed that all those in the small boats crossing the channel are fleeing war and persecution, fleeing for their life. But factually, that is inaccurate. According to detailed statistics and evidence, yet no one called those contributors peddlers of misinformation, because those speaking are considered to be compassionate, on the righteous side of the angels, or the Archbishop of Canterbury at least, and as defined by this House, they were seen to be saying the truth, regardless of the evidence. My point is that it's a political argument, yet we here are focusing on this notion that the public are being duped by misinformation. Or what about those who tell children that there are 140 genders to choose from, that biological sex is immutable? I would say that that is dangerous, disinformation. Others would say that me saying that is bigoted. There's at least an argument to be had, but it illustrates that the labelling process will always be contentious, and therefore I have to ask who is qualified to decide. A number of amendments in this group put forward a variety of experts who should be, for example, on the advisory committee, who should decide, and those who shouldn't. And I wanted to look at this notion of expertise in truth. For example, in the report by the Lords Committee, the Communication Committee, in relation to an incident when Facebook marked as false a post on COVID by a professor of evidence-based medicine at Oxford University, the committee asked Facebook about the qualifications of those who made that judgment, of the fact-checkers, and they were told that they were, quote, certified by the International Fact-Checking Network. Now, you know, who are they? And I'm just pointing out that possibly the evidence-based medicine professor at Oxford University might potentially have a bit more expertise here. And I just don't want a grad-grind version of truth here in relation to facts that are, and so on. If it was easy to determine the truth, then we would have basically able to wipe out centuries of philosophy. But if we're going to have a committee determining the truth, could we actually also have some experts in civil liberties? Maybe the Free Speech Union, Big Brother Watch, Index on Censorship should be on a committee on misinformation to ensure that we also don't take down information under the auspices of misinformation. Are private tech companies or professional fact-checkers or specially selected experts the best place to judge the reliability of all sorts of information, of the truth, or of which I would say at least requires judgment, analysis and competing perspectives? Too promiscuous a use of the terms mis and disinformation can also cause problems. Often whole swathes of opinion are lumped together. Those who raise civil liberties objections to lockdown were denounced as COVID-idiots, conspiracy theorists peddling misinformation, COVID deniers, on a par with those who suggested the virus was linked to everything from 5G masks to a conscious pandemic. Those who now raise queries about suppressing any reference to any vaccine harms, or are concerned who are concerned that people with proven vaccine harms are not being shown due support, are often lumped in with those who claim the vaccine was a crime against humanity, and all are accused of misinformation, with no nuance and no attempt at distinguishing very different perspectives. And then, with such a wide range of views labelled as misinformation, as a means of censorship, I think that those good intentions can backfire. And I do believe that there are good intentions behind many of these amendments. To conclude, bad and inaccurate ideas, if they are actually censored as mis or disinformation, can be pushed underground and allowed to fester, unchallenged in echo chambers. It can also create martyrs. How often do we hear those who have embraced full-blown conspiracy theories, often peddling cranky and scaremongering theories, say, they're trying to silence me because they know that what I'm saying is true. What are they afraid of? I think the best solution historically to bad speech is more speech, more argument, the fullest debate, discussion, scholarship, investigation, research, and yes, Googling, using Wikipedia, reading the odd book, and of course, judgment and common sense to figure it out. So we must remember in our history that what's labelled is, and we should also remember from our history that what's labelled as false by a minority of people can be invaluable scepticism, challenging a consensus, and eventually allowing truth to emerge. The fact was once, the truth was once, that the world was flat. Luckily, the fact-checkers weren't around to ban those minority who challenged that view, and now we know a different truth.
My Lords, having attached my name to Amendment